Hi, I'm Christopher Bolton, a production designer from South Africa. Welcome to this series of MSD5 tutorials. Let's get started. Welcome to this edition of the MSD5 tutorials. In this edition, we are going to be dealing with material properties, rendering, and the Fastnet render server. The process is very similar from the way by which you imported fixtures and objects. You come to View, and you open up the material list. If you are working in a program that already has materials in it, they'll be visible in your material list. To get started, a very easy way is to come to Import. This opens up your material list, which is of course in your MSD folder. In here, there are already preset materials for you. You can see the materials for glass, transparent materials, reflective materials. It's very easy to import. All you have to do is click on it, select the one you want from the list, and import it. As easy as it is importing a material, it's just as easy to make your own. You come to New, click on Simple. That brings up this dialog. Within this dialog, under Edit, you can choose the color that you want. You simply choose the color by sliding this along and finding the color that you need. If you are working with a specific Pantone color that is specific to a client, those RGB values can be entered here. You can also select from the predetermined colors that are on this list. For this example, I'm going to choose yellow. Under this dialog, you can also now see that you can add reflective and transparent properties as well as the highlight size. I'm going to change the reflective properties and make it nice and shiny. When you hit Apply, you will see in the preview window what the color or the actual texture would look like. Under Transparency, you can also make materials that are transparent. Under the highlight size, this will only have effect if you are affecting the reflection. You can also add a highlight size onto it. You can see now how the highlight size will show up where the point source of the light is coming from. The more highlight you put in, the more apparent the highlight size will become. Under the refraction properties, this is where you can put in the values for the materials like glass, water, and ice, so that they react to light in a natural way. If you want to make something absorbent, for example, a black drape which will absorb the light, you can put those properties in here under the absorption value. Once you click on OK, it'll now put that material here for you. If you don't want to use the name that they select for you, you can go in and change it to the name you choose. As another example, I'm going to show you how to make a glass texture. The first thing you need to do is work out what the refraction value of glass is. This information is easily accessible by clicking on Help, Contents, typing in refraction, clicking on Material Base, and scrolling down until you find this chart. It shows you the refraction values of diamonds, glass, quartz, perspex, water, and ice. Here we can see the glass refraction value is 1.55. You then come to New, Simple, put in your refraction value, in this case 1.55, edit the color. When I make glass, I prefer to use a light blue as I find that it's more realistic than using clear white. I call this glass, add its reflection, add its transparency, and apply it. Now you can see your glass in the actual preview window. I would now like to illustrate to you how you go about making a texture. Click on View, Material List. This will bring up your list. On the list, you go to New, Texture, which will bring up this dialog. It's very similar to the simple textures, except it now has the actual texture and mapping visible. Under here, you can come to the first one, which says Bitmap, and you browse for your texture. Once again, it'll take you to the texture folder, which is in your MSD folder where everything else is kept. I highly recommend that you make a project folder for each project that you're working on and then save all the materials within that project, making it easy to locate. In this case, I'm going to use a star cloth as an example. I'm going to choose the green one. Once I have that in, because I'm using a star cloth and it's a rectangular shape, I can therefore choose rectangular. Click on Fit to Preview so that it fits nicely in my preview window and click on Apply. That'll now show you the material that I have created. The next thing I'd like to do, I normally only do this for content like screens, projections, and in this case, star cloth. I come to this button here, click on Special. This takes you to illumination or the self-illumination value, where you can increase the self-illumination value slightly to make the texture brighter. Once you've done that, what I normally do is to keep track of my textures is come to the base and put in star cloth green. Apply that and save it. Under the base, the same properties that you had under Simple, you also have here. You can still have your reflection value and your transparency values. Click on OK. You will see now that it has put that material here into your material list. Now that it's in the material list, it's very easy to assign that to an object. I'm going to increase this window here for an example. Now what I do is I click on the object that I want to apply the actual texture to, right click it, go to Properties, go to Materials, click on the material that you want to change, and find the relevant material in your list. Because I've labeled it properly, it popped up just underneath, so I knew what I was looking for, and there it was. Once I apply that, you can see that it changes the texture here in the actual model. Let me just do this side quickly. Materials, click on the material, and choose the one you want, and change it. Before I move on, here's a little tip I want to show you. When you build a model and you've applied your texture, especially if you have applied that same texture to a lot of areas, in other words, stage pieces, etc., etc., you can change all of that, not by going into each property and changing the actual texture. You can simply come to the material, go to the material that you've made, browse for a different material. In this case, I'm going to change the color of the star cloth. Let's make it blue. Open that. Now you need to change the base name to blue. Apply. And you'll see now when I click on OK, it'll change the material here and from the model to blue on the star cloth. What that means is that you can go and change massive amounts of information by simply clicking on the texture properties. It is important to be aware that in the show designer itself, you can only change the properties of single objects and not grouped objects together. Once you have grouped objects together, you can't change the texture properties of that group. However, if you switch to the modeler, I'm going to show you the stage here for an example. Once you are in the modeler, the first thing you want to do is create the new texture or material. It's the same process. View, Material List, New, Simple. In this case, to illustrate, I'm going to use red so you can see the change. Let's call this stage color. Apply. Okay. You can see that the artist is grouped together with the stage. You need to ungroup that. Just select the stage group, right click, Properties, go into Parts. It's slightly different from Show Designer, but as easy to use. Go Add, Material, find the material that you want. In this case, stage color. Click on OK and assign. You can now see that the stage has changed color. Let's call this stage color. I can now group this together again and switch back to my Show Designer. Now that we are back in the Show Designer, you can see the changes I've made to the stage in the modeler. You can see that it's come through into the Show Designer. What's really nice about this is that even though you created that color in the modeler, if you come to the materials list here, you will see that stage color is also in there. You can still change that color here easy enough by going to Edit, changing it to the color you want, and saving it. You can clearly see the amount of time that you've saved by doing it this way. That's why it is crucially important that when you build all set pieces within the modeler itself, so that you can change the properties as an entire group rather than building your stage in Show Designer. Another thing I'd like to make you aware of is when you are applying a texture to a specific area, for example a screen. This screen is a custom screen that I have in my inventory. What I have done is I've gone into Photoshop and designed this texture specifically at that resolution. If I don't do that, the image will be stretched or warped depending on what the resolution of the image is before you insert it into the drawing. Let me give you an example. Material list. Here's the same image I've chosen on the screen. Let me browse for something different. I'm going to use this image here. Apply it. You can clearly see now how it has stretched the proportions of the image. This is why it is so important to make sure that the resolution of the texture you are using is correct. Let's change it back. Here you can clearly see that the resolution is 3200 by 1000. That is the actual dimensions in the actual drawing, about 10 by 3 meters. This means the resolution was brought into my design from the texture itself. The next aspect I'd like to illustrate to you is how to make a texture mask. Go to View, Material List, click on New, Texture. In here you browse for the texture you want to use. In this case I'm using a client's logo, and I've taken the logo and put it on a white background. Now under Mask, what I will do is browse for the exact same logo and put them over each other, so that when you apply it, it'll look like this. Now you can see how it has removed the white. If it was the white I wanted, and I wanted to remove the gold, I simply come to my mask and invert it. Simple as that. Now that I have that, let me give it a title. You can see here the artwork or logo that I have done. A nice way of using this, let me take this set as an example here. I insert a block, give it the properties I want it to be, in this case 2 meters by 2 meters. Once I apply that, you will see my shape there. I come to Part. I now add a material, find the material that I want, select it, and assign it. Once I assign it, you will now see that you have a 3D cutout of what that logo looks like. Let's place it on a set and render it out so I can show you exactly what the result will be. Once I've placed it where I want it to be, I can go to my 3D view, select my 3D view, and do a quick test render using this trace shadow button here. You can now clearly see how it is casting a shadow onto your set and how this is working as a cutout. You can see how easy it is to create a 3D looking object by using a flat 2D object and using your textures carefully. The next thing I'd like to show you is mapping. Let's use this object over here as an example. Switch to the modeler. As you can see, the shape of the object that I'm trying to map this texture onto is not your normal rectangle, cylinder, or square. That is normally when mapping would apply. Let me show you how easy it is to do. You come to View, go to Material List. I previously made this one before, so I'm going to use this texture here. What I did was I went into Photoshop and created myself this texture, giving myself a little bit more headroom and width, slightly narrower than your normal resolution here. You can see the resolution is quite small. Let's choose that. You then go into Mapping, and by trial and error, you try different dimensions in your scale, your width, your height, and your depth. I've previously mapped this, so I know what the values are. It really is as simple as trial and error. What it's doing is it's taking that texture and stretching it to fit according to that object. Once you apply that, you can see in your preview window it is now stretched it out of proportion. It might not look correct in your preview, but when you come back to the actual object, it'll be perfect. As well as messing around with the scale and the material properties itself, you can also change the rotation of the texture as well as the offset, meaning you can shift this texture by certain amounts if you want to get it perfect. In this example, let's put the offset in at 50. Now go OK. I come back to my object and you can see my texture is perfect. When I revert back to the show designer, you will see that my texture will also be perfect in there as well. And there we go. Last but certainly not least, as far as the materials go at least, I would like to show you how the bump works. I've taken this flat object. Let me open up the material list. I've created this texture here called blue water. If I open this and you go to bump, in the bump here you will see various different options you can choose. For now I'm going to choose fluid. Use the standard wavelength settings. If I apply that and I run a test render, you will now see how that creates a fluid effect on the texture. This is fantastic when you're trying to illustrate pools, ponds and things like that. You can easily affect the color of that pool as well by changing the actual color. The next thing within the bump, let's open this texture up again. You can create a wave effect. You can also select on which axis you want the wave effect to go. In this situation, X and Z will be the only ones that you can affect because your Y dimension is very, very small. Let's use X as an example. Let's put in a value here of 200. Once again, there are simple trial and error ways of being able to find out what it is you want to create with your texture. Let's render that. Now you can see how it has created a wave effect. In the same way, if you take the same texture, under bump, I go to the x-axis, I now choose the z-axis, apply that, render that, you will see the waves now go the other way. It really is as simple as that, and you can have hours of fun creating textures that will make your model look extra special. The next thing to do is to render out or capture some of the images from your design that you've done. What I've done here is I've opened up a previous design of mine in the actual Martin Show Designer, the offline visualizer itself. In here, there are numerous ways of controlling what the lights are doing. In the Show Designer, I showed you where you could manipulate what the fixtures were doing by going into the actual fixture properties. If you'd set that and you come to Show Control here and you click on Follow, if you had chosen MSD, the lights would have done exactly what settings you have done within the MSD Show Designer program. At the moment, I'm using the offline visualizer and I'm using it in combination with the Martin Light Jockey. I'm going to tell the program to follow the external source of DMX. I find Light Jockey very easy and simple to use. So I'm going to bring the master up here, click back on the model. I can move around the model and find the exact picture that I'm looking for. You then come to Camera, click on Save as Bitmap, and you can save a relatively high-res picture out of the program, especially as a Windows bitmap because it is such a high res. You can save it on the desktop. Once you've programmed and you've got the lighting you require for your render, what you need to do is, depending of course on what source your DMX is, save that DMX output into, in this case, my Light Jockey. You then switch back to the Show Designer. Once you're in the Show Designer, you use the camera functions to move around to find the look or the picture that you're looking for. Once you've done that, you come to Camera, Save Camera. Let's call this Render 1. You click on OK. You open up your source of DMX. In this case, I'm using Light Jockey, and you can see there's my DMX being sent. You then need to come to DMX here. You click on Follow. You will then see your spots will then go to exactly the same position as you program them in the offline visualizer. You can also double check to make sure that the lights are receiving DMX by clicking on their fixture, going to Spot Beams, and clicking on Always. If you click on Always, you will see the light source there. If there wasn't any DMX, those beams would be black, which means there is something wrong and you have to double check it. Let's put them off for now. There are many different ways of which you can go by rendering your picture out. You can either click on this button here, Trace Shadow, which will do a test render. By doing that, it'll not render out any of the smoke effects and you therefore won't see any of the beams or the fixtures. What you need to do is come to Display Mode, click on Render, click on Start. When you click on Start, it'll bring up this dialog. In this dialog here, you can control your ambient light, the smoke, the density of the smoke, and what size window you would like it to render out. If you click on OK, what will happen is it'll then start rendering the picture within the program. The problem with rendering the picture that way is it'll render the picture in the window here, and therefore you can't use the program for any other purposes. What I do is create a render file. Let's go back, come to Display Mode, Render, create a render file. That'll take you to a render file folder, which again, like everything else, is kept in your MSD folder. What it has done is put the project name first and the camera name second as a reference so that you know what picture you've saved. Click on Save. That'll now bring up this dialog again. Activate the smoke, push the smoke up. I prefer using it around 8 or 9. Bring the ambient light down to about 20, and personally I prefer haze. Once you click on OK, it will go through a process of calculation and will then calculate and render the picture. Once you've created the render file, you then open the MSD Fastnet Render Client. All the computers that you have installed the render server on will then come up in this left-hand column. You then come to the plus button. It'll ask you for the resolution. In this case, I want to render out the resolution of the window, which is 1280 by 800. You then browse for the render file, go to Libraries, go to Render Files, find the render file you want. I'm going to use this here as an example. I open it up. You can browse for where you want to put the output file. Normally it puts it in bitmaps in your MSD folder. You choose that, say that it's OK, save, click on OK. It'll then put it into this list for you here. The nice thing about this is that you can queue up a whole lot of drawings, and then before you leave at the end of the day to go home, click on play. By the time you get back in the morning, all your drawings should be done. That concludes this edition of the MSD5 tutorials, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you in the next one, Dynamic Objects.